He didn't even raise his voice at first, just stared across the conference table, lips curling like he'd been waiting for this moment all morning. Apologize to my son, or you're done here. The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through the fluorescent hum. I looked around. 15 people from finance, 3 from audit, 2 interns. Every one of them froze. You could practically hear the coffee cups stop midair. His son Nathan sat to his right. Fresh out of grad school, perfect hair, confidence of someone who'd never once been told no. He smirked, tapping a pen against the report I'd spent 2 weeks cleaning up after his errors. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that silence has a weight of its own. The CFO, Richard Holt, leaned forward. Well? I met his eyes. For what exactly? He turned red, the kind of red that comes from ego, not anger. For disrespecting Nathan during yesterday's review. For undermining him in front of his team, I smiled, slow and steady. You mean when I pointed out that your son's streamlined forecast forgot to include payroll tax obligations for Q3? The room stayed silent, but I caught the small flicker in a junior analyst's eyes. The kind that says, "Please stop talking before this gets worse." Richard slammed his hand on the table. You think you're untouchable because you've been here 12 years. But this department runs on respect, Anna. And you just lost yours. Nathan finally spoke. Maybe next time, keep your comments to yourself. Some of us are trying to modernize this place. Modernize. I echoed softly. That's what you call deleting half of the compliance formulas? He shrugged. Too complicated. People like simplicity. People like lies, I thought. But I said nothing. Richard leaned back, pretending composure. You have until 5 to apologize, or you can clean out your desk. And that was it. The public verdict. In front of the entire floor. No warning, no chance to explain, just an order to bow to nepotism or leave. I gathered my notes quietly, nodded once and said, Understood. He mistook that for surrender. They always do. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. Instead, I reread my employment contract, line by line like a bedtime story. 12 years of loyalty condensed into 22 pages of clauses and fine print. And then, on page 19, subsection D. In the event of termination without cause, employee retains full rights to all internally developed compliance software and frameworks authored independently. I almost laughed. They'd never noticed it. Back when I first joined, I'd been a contractor, hired to stabilize the company's internal audit automation. When they converted me to full-time, they reused the same contract template and never deleted that clause. 12 years later, it still stood. By morning, my decision was already made. The office was buzzing with whispered pity when I walked in. People glanced up, then quickly looked away, pretending to check emails. Nathan was already in the break room, bragging about how he'd handled the compliance dinosaur. I passed him without a word. At 9:03 a.m., Richard appeared in my doorway. He looked smug, rested. Hope you learned your lesson, he said. I smiled. I did. I handed him the printed resignation letter. Crisp, folded once. He barely glanced at it before smirking. Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before embarrassing my son. He turned to leave, but the door hadn't even shut when a voice shouted down the hall. Sir, you did what? It was Marianne, the company's legal counsel. Her heels clattered like gunfire as she rushed in, waving a folder. Please tell me you didn't just accept Anna's resignation. Richard blinked. She quit. What's the problem? Marianne's eyes darted between us. Oh my God, she whispered. You just voided the proprietary software rights. All of our audit automation tools, her frameworks, those belong to her now. The room went so still I could hear the air conditioning click. Richard's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Everything she built is company property. I raised an eyebrow. Not according to Section 12D. He froze. I could see him replaying every moment, every word from yesterday, every smirk. Realization was starting to crawl up his spine like cold water. Marianne flipped open the folder, tapping the highlighted section. She's right. It's still active. You never amended her contract. She owns the compliance architecture. Richard stared at me, pale now. You're bluffing. I leaned back in my chair. Then feel free to delete it. Let's see how long the system lasts. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or slam doors. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a smile, a clause no one ever read, and the kind of calm that makes people nervous. As Marianne kept talking, I picked up my coffee, the same cheap break room brew I'd sipped through layoffs, mergers, and budget cuts, and took one slow drink. The taste hadn't changed in 12 years, but everything else had. That morning, I walked out of that building for the last time. No tears, no speech, just silence. And a system that was about to remind them exactly who built its bones. They thought I was leaving. I was only getting started. When you leave a company after 12 years, people expect some kind of goodbye. A cake, a speech, maybe a tear or two in the parking lot. I gave them nothing. Just silence and a half smile that lingered longer than it should have. That night, I cleaned my home office. 12 years of files, backups, and audit notes neatly archived on an external drive I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was protecting what was mine. The compliance framework I'd built, Sentinel, wasn't just a program. It was a living system. Automated risk mapping, audit trails, and cross-checks that had saved the company from 3 separate fines. Every log still ran through a license I owned. When they made me apologize to their prodigy, they didn't just insult me. They fired their firewall. By Monday, my inbox was flooded. Not from the company. Those accounts had been deactivated. But from old colleagues using personal emails. Anna, something's off. The audit console is blank. Can you check the validation tool? It's crashing. I didn't respond. They'd figure it out eventually. At 10:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened. Anna, it's Marianne. Please call me back. Urgent. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was scared. By noon, the rumors had reached me through LinkedIn messages and quiet text threads. The quarterly compliance sync had failed mid-meeting. Nathan's fancy, streamlined dashboard was displaying red error codes instead of financial metrics. The CFO had apparently lost his composure in front of the board. A few analysts messaged me privately. Did you do something? I didn't answer, because the truth was I hadn't done anything. Yet. See, Sentinel wasn't vindictive. It was obedient. It was built to follow one simple rule. Maintain operational integrity unless license ownership changes. When Richard accepted my resignation without legal transfer, the system automatically entered restricted mode. That meant read-only access, no updates, no exports, no external syncing. In plain English, frozen. It wasn't revenge. It was protocol. Around 2 p.m., Marianne called again. I picked up this time. Anna, we need to talk, she said quickly. The system locked everyone out. The license is reading owner authorization required. It says your credentials are still listed as primary. I sipped my tea. That's correct. She exhaled. Can we meet? Maybe we can negotiate a handover? I'm not unreasonable, I said softly. But I'm not a fool either. You and I both know that framework is my intellectual property. I understand, she said carefully. But the CFO, he's saying you intentionally sabotaged? I cut her off. Marianne, don't finish that sentence. You know exactly how Sentinel works. It followed its license clause. They triggered it themselves. She hesitated. Can you at least help us restore read access? The audit committee is panicking. There's a board review tomorrow. Send me the request in writing, I said. There was a long pause before she replied. You really built a fortress, didn't you? No, I said. I built accountability. That evening, I went for a walk near the river, trying to clear my head. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt still. When people think of revenge, they picture chaos. Lawsuits, screaming matches, shattered glass. Mine was quieter. It lived in the fine print no one read. in the lines of code they dismissed as legacy junk. Around 8, my phone buzzed again. A message from one of my former interns, Leah. They're saying the board called an emergency session. Nathan can't recover the audit reports. Richard's blaming IT. People are terrified. I typed one word back. Expected. By morning, things had escalated. The company's quarterly investor presentation was due in 3 hours. The financial data, every number tied to risk and compliance, was locked. I didn't need to be in the building to imagine the panic. The same interns who once fetched coffee were now fielding calls from executives who suddenly couldn't open files. At 9:07 a.m., Marianne called again. Anna, please. The CFO is, well, he's not doing well. The board wants to resolve this. They're asking what it would take to reinstate the license. What it would take, I repeated slowly, is an apology. The same one I was denied. You want Richard to apologize? I want accountability, I said. And I want my consulting rights reinstated under Raven Analytics LLC. I own it. It's the original contracting entity before I was internalized. Otherwise, Sentinel stays asleep. She didn't argue. I could hear typing in the background. I'll relay that, she said finally. An hour later, social media started whispering. The company's investor call had been postponed due to technical challenges. Stock dipped 4% before lunch. And then, at 2:16 p.m., my phone lit up again. Private number. Anna. Richard's voice cracked through the line. Let's talk. Of course, I said. Just remember, you're the one who wanted a public lesson. He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him swallow his pride through the static. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. We'll fix this. Just tell me what you need. I smiled. Good. Because this isn't about breaking your company. It's about reminding it who built the walls that keep it standing. And for the first time since he'd humiliated me, he said the words I never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry. But I wasn't done yet. Because apologies without change, they're just noise. And I'd spent too many years listening to men like him make noise. The apology came on a Wednesday morning, 30 hours after the company's investor meeting collapsed into silence. Richard called me from his office, his voice steadier than before. Anna, we've reviewed your contract. Legal confirmed the clause. I may have spoken out of turn. May have? I repeated. He sighed. I'm sorry, all right? Let's just fix this. There it was, the apology. Not because he meant it, but because he had no choice. I'm not against fixing things, I said, but I won't just hand Sentinel back for free. I built that system. It's my work. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I want recognition, consulting rights, and a clean exit package, retroactive to the date of my resignation. There was a pause. You're holding us hostage, Anna. I almost laughed. No, Richard. I'm holding you accountable. By the next morning, Marianne reached out to schedule a formal discussion. Off the record, she said. The board is furious. They want this resolved quietly before it reaches investors. You still have the only license key I agreed to meet in person. Neutral ground. A cafe halfway between downtown and the industrial park where the company's office sat like a gray box of glass and ego. When I arrived, Marianne was already there. Laptop open, legal documents scattered across the table. She looked tired, worn thin. I'm not here to fight, she started. But you have to understand, what you're doing, locking an entire compliance system, has consequences. What I did, I said calmly, was follow procedure. The license reverted to me because of Richard's decision. The system isn't locked out of spite. It's locked because the terms changed. She rubbed her forehead. The board won't see it that way. The board can read, I said. Clause 12D has been there since day one. Marianne stared at me for a long moment. Do you know why they're really panicking? I shook my head. Because the SEC is requesting an audit review from your system. They can't generate it without your credentials. If we miss that deadline... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I leaned back. Then it seems we both have incentive to resolve this quickly. She nodded, typing something into her laptop. Here's the proposal. You'll be rehired as a consultant under Raven Analytics LLC, independent status, full control of your framework, compensation, triple your previous salary, retroactive benefits included. In return, you'll restore system access and provide operational continuity. I read the offer slowly. It was more than I expected. Too generous, almost. What's the catch? I asked. Marianne smiled thinly. No catch. Just a confidentiality clause. They don't want the story getting out. I closed the laptop. Tell them to remove that line. I'm not interested in silence anymore. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from old coworkers. Word had spread. They all wanted to know if it was true, that I'd negotiated my way back, that the CFO had been forced to bend. I didn't answer anyone. Not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk, sipping coffee gone cold, staring at the dormant code window on my screen. Sentinel's interface glowed faintly in standby mode. Its heartbeat, a pulsing blue light, still waiting. I'd spent years building that system, line by line, from hotel rooms and late-night audits, through every merger and rebrand. It wasn't just data. It was memory. My memory. And now they wanted it back, pretending they suddenly cared about collaboration. I reopened the contract draft and added one final clause of my own. Raven Analytics reserves full rights to system updates, derivative frameworks, and adaptive integrations created after reinstatement. Any breach of contract or interference with proprietary code will result in immediate license termination without notice. They wanted my system? Fine. But I was making sure they could never erase me again. The next morning, Marianne called to confirm they accepted. Everything's signed. They've wired your consulting fee. You'll receive system access requests from IT within the hour. I thanked her, though I could hear the tension still in her voice. Richard isn't happy, she said quietly. He feels humiliated. He should, I replied. He forgot who built the walls he stands in. When I logged into Sentinel again, it felt like opening a vault that had been sealed for years. Everything was there. Logs, audit trails, compliance maps, all intact. I could have restored full functionality instantly, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd taken for granted. So, I initiated a gradual reactivation. System by system, server by server, each required my manual authorization. It would take days, maybe a week. Just long enough for them to think about what respect really costs. At 11:04 a.m., a Slack message popped up. Nathan. Hey, Anna. Guess we're working together again. No hard feelings, right? I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, hard feelings fade. Consequences don't, he didn't reply. That evening, Marianne called one last time. The board signed the final agreement. You're officially reinstated as a consultant. Congratulations. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Because sometimes justice isn't about revenge or money. It's about correction, about balance, about making sure the people who thought you were disposable finally understand that competence has a backbone. Before I shut my laptop, I opened Sentinel's admin console one last time. The system hummed to life, every line of code like an old friend waking up. At the bottom of the dashboard, a new message appeared automatically, something I'd programmed years ago for moments like this. Integrity is not what you preach. It's what remains when power fades. I smiled. For once, the system and I were perfectly aligned. When I walked back into the office a week later, the building looked exactly the same. Glass walls, gray carpets, that same faint smell of burnt coffee and old toner. But something had shifted. Conversation stopped when I passed. Eyes followed me like I was a ghost returning to claim unfinished business. I wasn't there as an employee anymore. My badge now read consultant, and everyone knew what that meant. Untouchable. Richard didn't greet me. He didn't even look at me when I entered the meeting room. Nathan sat across the table, pretending to check his phone, but the tremor in his hand gave him away. Marianne began briskly, voice steady but careful. We've restored all primary systems. Anna has agreed to assist with a full audit reconciliation before the external review next month. I nodded once. That's correct. I'll be overseeing integrity checks on Sentinel's restored modules. All access changes will go through me. Richard finally looked up. We just need you to make sure it's stable, he said coldly. No surprises. I smiled. Stability depends on how much you've changed since I left. He didn't respond. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Most of the staff avoided direct eye contact. The same people who once laughed with Nathan at my expense now sent overly polite emails filled with thank you and appreciate your help. Guilt has a way of softening even the sharpest tongues. Still, I kept my head down and worked. Every night I stayed late, reviewing logs and comparing old entries against the new data. That's when I started noticing something strange. Hidden among the audit records were unexplained edits, manual overrides entered during the months I was gone. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Transactions flagged as vendor discrepancies had been reclassified as approved exceptions. Dozens of them. At first, I thought it was sloppiness, but when I cross-checked the vendor IDs, they all traced back to one of Nathan's new efficiency initiatives. I opened the change history. Every single override had been done under his admin credentials. I sat back in my chair, pulse slowing. This wasn't incompetence. It was manipulation. The next morning, I walked into Marianne's office. She looked exhausted, surrounded by folders and coffee cups. Do you have a minute? I asked. She gestured to the chair. Always. What's going on? I slid a printed report across her desk. I found these in the audit logs. Unauthorized modifications, all tied to Nathan Holt. She frowned, scanning the pages. Are you sure these weren't system errors from the license transfer? I'm sure, I said. These are manual entries. Look at the timestamps, each done after 11 p.m. That's not batch automation. That's human. Her expression changed. If these are what I think they are, the SEC could see this as data tampering. Exactly, I said quietly, and Richard has no idea. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Anna, this could destroy them. I didn't answer. She already knew where my thoughts were going. That afternoon, I was scheduled for a status update meeting with Richard and Nathan. The room felt colder than usual, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Richard started stiffly. How's the system performing? Flawlessly, I said. But there's something you should see. I turned my laptop toward them, displaying the audit trail on the screen. A neat timeline of every manual edit, every reclassification, each bearing Nathan's digital signature. Nathan's smirk disappeared. That's not what it looks like. Richard blinked. Nathan, what is this? Probably test data, he stammered. You know how these systems can glitch. Glitches don't log user IDs, I said calmly. These were intentional. Richard's face went pale. You're saying my son falsified audit data? I'm saying your son altered regulated financial records, I replied. And the timestamps prove it. Nathan stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're just trying to get back at me. I didn't raise my voice. I don't need revenge, Nathan. I have proof, he stormed out, muttering something under his breath. But Richard stayed seated, staring at the screen. His jaw tightened, his fingers trembling slightly on the table. Finally, he whispered, How bad is it? Bad, I said. Enough to trigger an investigation if anyone outside finds out. He closed his eyes. Can you fix it? Not without leaving a trace, I replied. And not without breaking the law myself. Richard looked up, defeated. Then what do we do? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You do what you should have done from the beginning. Tell the truth. And let me clean it up properly. He stared at me for a long time. Then, quietly, he nodded. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone else left. The building hummed with low fluorescent light, the kind of silence that feels alive. I opened Sentinel one last time, locking Nathan's credentials and preserving the logs in a separate encrypted archive. Not to destroy him, but to protect myself. When I finally shut down my computer, it was past midnight. My reflection in the dark screen looked tired but certain. I wasn't the same woman who'd been ordered to apologize. I was the one they now relied on to save them. And maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all. Watching the people who once dismissed you realize that the foundation they tried to bury you under was the very ground keeping them from collapsing. By Monday morning, the whispers had spread beyond the office. Something about data irregularities, late-night edits, vendor concerns. No one said Nathan's name out loud, but everyone knew. Corporate gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile. "Morning, Ms. Keller. Mr. Holt is in early." Of course he was. Panic wakes people up better than coffee. Richard was already in the boardroom, pacing. The lines around his eyes looked deeper, the arrogance gone. On the table lay a printed report, my audit report, open to the page that exposed Nathan's edits. Marianne sat quietly beside him, legal pad in hand. "Anna," Richard began, voice rough. "Close the door, please." I did. He sank into his chair, exhaling. "The board knows." "Someone leaked the audit summary." "Leaked?" I asked carefully. "From where?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. What matters is the damage. The SEC wants clarification. I'm meeting with them tomorrow." Marianne glanced up. "They're not threatening sanctions yet, but they're watching closely. If they find intent—" "They will," I interrupted softly. "The logs don't lie." Richard rubbed his face with both hands. "Nathan swears it was an oversight." I leaned forward. "Oversight doesn't explain deliberate overrides." His voice cracked. "He's my son, Anna." I nodded. "And this is your company. You'll have to choose which one you're willing to lose." Silence filled the room. That afternoon, Nathan showed up at my office door, pale and defiant. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't look up from my screen. "There's nothing to win. I'm just doing my job." "You could have deleted those logs," he snapped. "You didn't have to show them." I finally met his eyes. "You're right. I didn't have to. But I also didn't have to cover your mistakes." He laughed bitterly. "You think my dad will choose you over me?" "I think," I said slowly, "he's realizing what happens when you build a legacy on shortcuts." For a moment, the confidence drained from his face, replaced by something almost human. Fear. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't follow. The next day, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Marianne insisted I attend as technical advisor. When I entered, the tension was thick enough to taste. Richard sat at the head of the table. Nathan was beside him, eyes down. Across from them were 7 board members and a representative from the external audit firm. The chairwoman spoke first. "We've reviewed the preliminary findings. It's clear that unauthorized changes were made to financial audit data. Ms. Keller, can you confirm that these edits were performed using Mr. Nathan Holt's credentials?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Every entry is time-stamped, verified, and backed up across 3 independent logs. Nathan shifted in his seat. "It was a trial process. We were testing a faster classification method." The chairwoman didn't blink. "Testing without documentation, without authorization, and within a regulated system?" Richard tried to interject, but she raised a hand. "Mr. Holt, your leadership allowed this to occur. That's a failure of oversight." He went silent. I kept my tone neutral. "I've already prepared a restoration plan to correct the discrepancies. It'll take 2 weeks, but it's recoverable." The chairwoman nodded. "We appreciate your diligence, Ms. Keller. As for Mr. Nathan Holt, the board will deliberate on disciplinary action." Nathan's eyes darted to his father. "Dad, say something." But Richard didn't. He just stared at the table, shoulders heavy. After the meeting, Marianne caught up with me in the hallway. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "They'll likely remove Nathan from his role." "Richard may step down too." "I didn't want this," I said. "I know," she replied. "But sometimes integrity looks like betrayal to the wrong people." Her words stayed with me. 2 weeks later, the system was stable again. Sentinel purred quietly, its metrics flawless. I'd completed the restoration ahead of schedule, delivered the report, and finalized my consulting payout. On my last day, Richard came to find me. He looked older, defeated, but his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You saved this company, even after what I did." "I didn't save it," I said. "I just stopped it from collapsing under its own lies." He nodded slowly. "Nathan's resigned. The board's making it official next week. He's angry, but maybe it's what he needs." I didn't answer. Some lessons cost what they should. He cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. The board wants to offer you the role of compliance director. Full authority. No more consultants above you." For a moment, I just looked at him. 12 years ago, I'd have said yes without hesitation. But now? "I appreciate it," I said gently. "But I've built enough foundations for other people. It's time I build something for myself." He nodded again, understanding more than he wanted to. "Good luck, Anna." That evening, I walked out of the building for the second and last time. The sunset hit the glass panels, turning the office gold for a moment before fading back to gray. My phone buzzed. A message from Marianne. "You did the right thing. Proud of you." I smiled faintly, then deleted it. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about peace. People like Richard and Nathan will keep rebuilding their towers, patching cracks they can't see. But I'd learned something they never would. Power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from knowing you can walk away. And the system still remembers your name. As I reached the street, I looked back once. The building stood quiet, humming with the same electricity I'd once kept alive. Then I turned and walked toward the city lights, not as an employee, not as a victim, as the architect of my own ending.